Welcome to Music Crush, a new music podcast hosted by Flute New Music Consortium. I'm Elizabeth Robinson.
And I'm Nicole Reiner. If you like the show, please rate and review it on the platforms wherever you listen to podcasts, particularly on Apple Podcasts. It really helps people find us and grow the show. And of course, you can learn more about Flute New Music Consortium at flutenewmusicconsortium.com. Inga Chinilina is a composer, improviser, and pianist based in Providence, Rhode Island. Her work includes music for acoustic instruments from solo to orchestra, electronic music, and a mix of both. In addition to standalone music pieces, Inga also makes installations and music for dance and film. Inga is a PhD candidate in music and multimedia composition at Brown University, and her research explores how composers represent sound entities that bear emotional meaning and possess complex timbre through the use of Western European instruments. Inga holds a BM in Composition and Performance from Berklee College of Music and an MFA in Theory and Composition from Brandeis University. We were lucky enough to initially learn about her through her solo, Learning to Love America, which won FNMC's 2024 composition competition in the solo flute category. Inga, welcome to Music Crush. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you. It's lovely to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Well, of course, we would love to know absolutely everything about Learning to Love America.
In my work, I translate my experiences in music, and it usually experiences of nature, womanhood, and migration. And Learning to Love America speaks to immigrant experience, and it's based on a poem by Shirley Lim. And when I read this poem, it resonated with my personal experience, and I found that she had a way to capture things through words and some feelings that I thought I can do similar thing with music. And just starting reading it with its first lines, because it has no pure product, because the Pacific Ocean sweeps along the coastline, because the water of the ocean is cold, and because land is better than the ocean, and because I say we rather than they. And I was like, oh my God, she just captured so many things. And it's not literal translation of feelings word by word. Oh, I feel this, I feel that. But now I felt a connection, and it made me think of some of things that I've experienced. And with my piece, Learning to Love America, I tried to do similar things as Shirley Lim did in her poem by translating my experience into musical framework. But besides just notating notes on page, in this piece, I'm giving a place for a performer to share their own views and their own personal experience, because even we have some overarching themes, none of immigration stories are the same, and none of the things we feel are the same too. This is why in the piece I use moments where I give performer a line from the poem, and I give some indication, like, for example, play multiphonic, which is a technique when a flutist can play multiple notes at the same time, like a chord. And the performer decides what do they want to channel in this moment, what type of timbre, what type of feeling through their playing. And I made this work in a collaboration with Alejandro Esquer, who is a Mexican flutist. And he gave me quite a lot of suggestions while working on this. And I think the final performance, I was able to give the framework and share my thoughts through this work. And he was able to bring it to life by also bringing part of his experience into this.
I'm excited to dig into this. This sounds very exciting. Thank you for your thoughtfulness in writing this piece.
Yeah.
Can we back up? You just seem so interesting in so many ways from reading your bio. And so I'm really interested in your PhD research, and I wonder if you can explain it a little bit more for us. It sounds so interesting, but also very subjective and personal. And so I'm wondering how you're going about answering the questions that you've set up for yourself.
In preparation to this podcast, I was thinking how to concisely deliver what I've been working on for so many years. And I would start with that the overarching theme of my work is active translation in music. And In my research, I looked how composers translate sounds of their daily life, such as sound of an ocean or sound of a bell, into musical works. And I trace how cultural and historical context may influence this process. I also look and trace what is lost in this act of translation. And I look at it at all stages of the compositional process, starting with the act of listening. And in my research, I ran a survey where I play sound of a bell to my respondents, who all are active musicians, composers with musical education. And I asked to identify the pitch of this bell. So I asked, after playing the recording, if you were a composer or orchestrator, what note would you choose to represent this sound? And to my surprise, we are all in the same room listening to the same bell sound. Almost no answers match. And
Wow.
you would think we all have musical training, we listen to the same sound, and each of us has a own response, which led me to thinking that active listening is a very solitude process. And music is not such a universal language, especially if we step outside of the framework that we are being taught and that we are living in. And ultimately, I think about limits and constraints of musical perception and influence of existing musical language on the creative process. With that in mind, in my personal creative practice, I use similar tools as I do in my research, and I seek to translate my experience and knowledge into musical language that I can share with others. And I start with using recordings. I analyze them with spectral tools, but I also rely a lot on my personal musical perception and my experience of the sounds. So in my work, Pagan Peel, I started with recording sounds of a large bell in San Francisco. And I did it by placing a microphone inside the bell. I wanted to capture this experience that I never had before, and I think not many people have in their life, of actually being inside of what now feels like 10 feet wide bell. Maybe it's smaller, but it's amazing. And I recorded it and I looked at the spectrum of this bell, and it informed my harmonic language and overall musical framework for this piece. At the same time, I not solely follow the partials that I derive from this bell recording, as, for example, would be doing composers of spectral school. But I try to remember, how do I remember this sound and what is most important out of these little partials and little data that I have in my spectral analysis, and how do I actually transfer and share my experience of being inside this big bell with my audience. And ultimately, in my creative work, I am translating my experiences into work I can share with others, and I use all the tools available to help me make it happen.
Based on what you've been describing, do you think that for you the idea comes first and then you figure out how to make it happen in music? Or do the musical ideas come first and then you back up and kind of say, where did this come from in my experience? Or is that too simplistic of a question?
And I think for me, first comes a feeling
Mm.
that I want to channel. And it's my personal feeling, and also a feeling I want the audience to feel. Like, for example, I want you to be happy, but then a little bit reflective at the end. And then I start thinking, what experiences in my life made me feel like that? And how can I put it into sound?
Backing up a little deeper. I don't know if this is
Mhm.
backing up. Going to the side. I wanted to ask you a little bit about your take on the academic world, I guess. Just your personal perspective. We keep reading news stories about academia's struggles in the news and in social media, from draconian funding cuts to troubled relationships on campus. Of course, the arts have always felt a little precarious in an academic setting. How is the view from Brown, where you are right now, and what are your current career goals post-doc?
Of course, I also read this news. Maybe many of this news will read similar, and the field overall seems quite bleak at the times.
Hmm.
At the same time, at Brown, I feel we are quite lucky, and the department is doing well. And this, I feel like the students and the emotional atmosphere, at least in our department, feels healthy and energizing. And to back it up with some numbers, at Brown we have 7,600 students and we have 80 music concentrators. At the same time, we have 1,600 students taking music classes. So students across the campus from different disciplines want to come to the music department and to be with us to learn something about music. And I think act of music making is this process act is something that helps us to transcend sometimes barriers and come together as a community. And I also think that there has been happening a shift in the field in music education, and that Brown adjusted what seems to me quite effectively to these changes. So, for example, we have a flexible curriculum for undergrads so they can cherry pick their classes. And we also have a wide variety of offerings. So it could be like orchestra, it could be jazz ensembles, it could be Ghanaian ensemble. So they can go so many different routes. And lastly, what I think is quite important in the offerings is the emphasis on music production. So one of the most common capstone project for undergrads, it's making an album. And once you start making an album or moving towards making an album, you realize, oh, I actually need to know a lot of things. And I think partially as a result of it, I'm teaching music theory next semester. And music theory, maybe not the subject I was the most excited in my personal undergrads. But I have an overwhelming level of interest. I have dozens of students emailing me right now asking to be in the class. And I need to cap class at 30 because we don't have more keyboards than that. And that's quite exciting because I think with forming the curriculum for the undergrads, we don't force them to take music theory classes, but they, by their own personal journey, come to the conclusion that they need to know the fundamentals in order to be effective in their music making. And overall, I think with all these changes and the direction the music department at Brown takes, it's a pretty exciting place to be right now.
Do you have a sense of what is making students so excited to take music theory? I teach it a little and would like to steal whatever you guys are doing.
I think that they see practical application. So I incorporate a lot of creative assignments. And if they are songwriters, they're like MCs, they're recording engineers, and they need to hear and to be able to say, oh, you like often this note. And they want to be confident in this knowledge. We have classes that start from the as basics things as like writing a scale, but they're like, okay, we're going to nail it. And I've heard that the responses that this is a very challenging class. And this is challenging because for many students, this would be things that they learn over several years at early stage. And now we just jam it all in one semester. And it's challenging to cover all these materials, especially ear training skills.
Yes.
But they see how it influenced their life and their practice. So they put the work into this.
That's very exciting. That's really heartwarming to hear.
Yeah. Plus, I would say it's by personal thinking, but I feel like students feel that they're seen and that their work is rewarded when I give them this feedback and I like keep checking in every week, like, have you done this? Oh, that's good. Or maybe like give some suggestions. So I think this like constant feedback from me and from their peers, it shows them how much progress they're doing and that they're doing great work. Yeah.
That's really lovely.
Yeah.
Well, back on you, you have collaborated with a lot of active performers and really active ensembles. And we always love to pick the brains of our composers and find out how we as performers can be better musical partners for you as the composer. What are some of your tips?
My personal tips, which probably would be different for each composer, and that's also a very important thing in mind to think what type of a composer you're working with.
Sure.
But for me, it would be clear communication, and it would give me information. What do you want for me to write? What will be the setting and circumstances? How you want this music to be performed? And if I make a good, relevant, idiomatic for you and your practice work, most likely you will perform it with good energy, you'll be happy about the performance, and it will be a good performance overall. Which also sometimes people don't really want to perform, but they still deliver a good performance because I think you as performers, you like trained to do this. But I feel like that if there is like this connection and understanding, that it brings the work to a new level. And some questions that for me like good to reflect with the performer before starting to write the piece is, how much risk do you want to take? Because sometimes it would be, oh, you just like write what you want, and I'm like, I can write it, it may not work.
Sure.
Because every time you expand the boundaries, you do something that has never been done before. Will it work? No one knows. And this is a question of the setting. Like, do you have enough time? Do you have a time to check in and try it out before the actual performance to see is it working? And if not, as a composer, need to have a very solid backup plan. Then the conversation of techniques, what the performer, what you're comfortable with, because I also sometimes notice this tendency when people, they're so professional, like we can do everything. But for example, if you cannot do flutter tongue, you're not going to learn it. And just like, let me know, I cannot do flutter tongue. And I went to speech therapist. I just cannot roll my tongue and I will never be able to do this. So I don't expect people to be able to learn or to do everything, but knowing what you like to do, what you can do, which could be different things, and what you prefer not to but can, also good to know. And lastly, one thing that I notice people be more and more transparent lately about is how much time do you have to practice?
Oh, sure.
Because I feel that there is like, at least like in my experience, there is a shift to this like high productivity. We commissioned 10,000 million pieces, performed 700 concerts all around the globe. You probably don't have time to practice, which is, I feel like the field sometimes demands us to be highly productive. And if you're in this stage, it's also good to know so that I can deliver something, say, readable. At the same time, you could be an emerging performer and you want to shake everyone by doing things no one has ever done. And you're going to make it your, I know, like master thesis and work on it for the whole year. And yeah, then we can try to do things that people will never do again, probably. Why not?
Those are some great tips.
Inga, what inspires you most as a composer?
As I've mentioned, it's me translating my experiences into music, and it could be nature, which I have been doing in several works of mine. It could be experience of womanhood and migration, as I've done in Learning to Love America. And as another example of working, sometimes it could be, as another example of things that inspire me, it could be experiences of other people, as for example, I did in my work Salt Soaked. And in this work, before starting the compositional process, it is a work for dance and fixed media. I went to dancers and I asked them to share their personal stories of immigration, theirs or their families. And each of the dancer, we did it in the rehearsal hall, and I just recorded them with my phone, just shared 30 seconds to like minute, 2 minutes, something personal to them related to immigration experience. And then I combined these stories and weaved it into a single narrative for the whole work that lasts about half an hour. So by doing this, I was deriving inspiration and thoughts from other people's experience, but also relating it to my personal experience. And this is ultimately what formed the narrative of the work.
So you've told us a little bit about what inspires your composition. Can you tell us about any projects you might be working on right now?
Currently, I'm working on several pieces, but I'm particularly excited about work I'm doing with Rose Hageley, who is a vocalist, and we are making a piece for voice, electronics, and audience participation. And I want that in this work, we gather as a community and to share our music making practice. And as a composer, I am providing framework for this act. And I want to share a little bit how this work will be structured. So I will have a voice layer where Rose will be singing. And at the same time, her voice will be captured by a microphone and specially played back through an array of speakers, but not in its original form. It will be multiplied into hundreds of roses, and each of this voice will be pitch shifted, though by the end it will create a complex harmony, which at the same time won't be static, but will be shifting and floating between the speakers as the performance goes. Sounds pretty exciting. And talking about taking risk, we are adding a level of audience participation. And to coordinate audience, I will be using a visual score. And in this score, I will be projecting shapes of different color on the screen behind Rose. And before the concert, each member of the audience who is willing to participate can pick up an ocarina of different color. And when they see the color on the screen that matches the color of the ocarina, they start playing. And once the color is gone, they stop playing. To make it matching these murky vocal cords that will be created, I developed and I'm printing currently sets of ocarinas in different tunings so that we can go a little bit beyond traditional scale and create some complex spectral chords in this performance. And the concert will be in January. It's free. We're trying to make it as accessible as possible. I also made a version for people with visual impairments, for those who can distinguish colors. Also will be able to participate, and we will be showing it throughout East Coast, and I hope many people can come and be with us.
Do you have plans to capture it on video so that those of us in the hinterlands can see it too?
Yes, absolutely. We hope to do a good documentation of it.
This has been so stimulating. Your ideas are so interesting. Thank you for spending this time with us today. Our favorite last question on the show is always, could you, any genre at all, could you name 3 pieces you're listening to right now?
Absolutely. I'm so thrilled to answer this question because it gives me a chance to share all my thoughts about what I'm listening currently. And my first 2 is an opera Chovanshina by Mussorgsky. And when I'm saying 2, because Mussorgsky died before finishing the orchestration. So multiple composers completed this orchestration, and we have several versions of this piece. And in particular, I'm concentrating on a version by Rimsky-Korsakov and Shostakovich. And Rimsky-Korsakov was a friend of Mussorgsky. He finished his orchestration very shortly after Mussorgsky's death in 1882. And Shostakovich finished his in 1958. And it allows me to see how compositional language and orchestration language changed in this something 50, 70 years. And it is even more interesting because there is a scholarly writing by Denisov who says that some of Shostakovich orchestration was inspired by Mahler, in particular, the Mahler's The Abschied, which is part of the Song of the Earth and its opening chord. And I can see the traces of the Mahler in Shostakovich, but at the same time, by comparing these 2 particular orchestration and listening, I can see that Rimsky-Korsakov and the Song of the Earth was written in 1909. Rimsky-Korsakov in 1882 already did this kind of like innovative orchestration. So for me, it just shows how the inspiration is not necessarily linear, one person to another person, and how I can find totally not obvious connections, because I see very similar writing and double basses and harp and the usage of tam-tam. So it has been a fascinating experience. And I also know that you asked for 3 pieces, so please let me share the third one, Gondwana by Tristan Murray. And I'm very fascinating because what he's doing in this piece, he's trying to replicate a sound of a large bell, very close to my own personal practice, but he's doing it by using a technique of sound synthesis that he borrows from computer music, from electronic music making. more particular, he follows the article that John Choning wrote on synthesis of complex spectra by means of frequency modulation. And what Tristan Murray is doing, he uses this very technique. He does all the math, but then he gives it to the instruments. And the results, it's quite fascinating. It's a fantastic piece to listen to. It just bell strokes going one after another and puts you in this mindset of the composer.
Well, these are all new to me. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question.
Inga, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
It's been great to get to know you a little bit.
It was wonderful to talk to you.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Music Crush. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can also support the podcast, read show notes, and learn more about FNMC by visiting www.flutenewmusicconsortium.com.